Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Neeru Tandon, Head Department of English, VSST College, Kanpur. We are doing paper on linguistics, and in this module number 24 titled Linguistic Ontogeny and Phylogeny, written by me, we are going to discuss some very interesting facts related with linguistics. Whenever we talk about linguistics, then there are certain questions that come in our mind. Of course, what is linguistics? Linguistics is the scientific study of languages. Language? Yes, of course. Language is the human language. We keep in mind humans whenever we talk about language. And human language, a child, as soon as he takes birth, the first thing when he just grows up, he tries to imitate. And by imitating, he just tries to acquire the language and reproduce it at the same time. How he does so? What are the various factors? Various researches have been done on this particular thing, particular area, and what are the outcome of those results? What are the various theories? What is actually linguistic ontogeny? We are going to discuss all these things in this present volume written by me. While much of what is now known about human development is the result of observational and experimental studies of ontogeny. Ontogeny, in a simple way, you can understand the development of individuals over their life course. The recognition that each individual's development is afforded and constrained by the time and place in which they grow up has led a number of researchers to look beyond ontogenetic development in contemporary societies to ask questions about the historical development of those societies and also about the development of the human species as a whole from the point when it evolved from the line that connects humans to other higher primates. In this module on linguistic ontogeny and phylogeny, we will also come to know about the acquisition of grammar and phonemic habits. Connection between ontogeny and phylogeny will be made clear along with phylogenetic changes. Before understanding linguistic ontogeny, we must understand the nature of linguistics. The following are some important nature of linguistics. Like human body, language is a complex system. Just like body has heart, brain, liver, kidney, and all are essential. In the same way, language also cannot be just survive. It cannot survive. It cannot just go on with the help of one thing. Suppose I take only sounds. Is it possible to have language based on only sounds? No, it's not. What we will do, that we require syntax, we require other forms of language to survive. So that's why linguistic ontogeny is important to consider. Now, these are the most important parts of a language, like syntax and structure of the word. We cannot express ourselves by the help of only one of the elements of language, that is sounds, or only with the word of structure, because all of these are interlinked. In language learning, speech is the fundamental thing. Reading and writing, they come later on. Now, language works through symbols, which are the words. For example, the word pen denotes certain object. Even a reader or a decoder or listener, for that any name you give, understands what the pen is, which object has been given the name pen. So we understand, we can visualize that, we can recognize that. So this word pen, P-E-N, 3 letters, they become the symbol. Language is not an inherent biological function of man. It is acquired through learning. Language is learnt through practice and habit formation. Rules and definition of grammar cannot help for the development of language of a child. According to Ben Jonson, speech is the instrument of society. A society cannot be thought of without language. Hence, the important purpose of language is communication. Language does not remain in a vacuum. It exists in the speakers. It is related to the culture of a particular society. It expresses that culture, it develops that culture, and the culture is formed with the help of the language itself. Language is flexible. Changes from time to time go on in respect of speech sounds, grammatical features, vocabulary, etc. Therefore, in language teaching, we should not be rigid. You can imagine, you have seen the language used in 14th century by Chaucer. Geoffrey Chaucer, in prologue to the Canterbury Tales, when he writes the, that is THEE, and time, that is TYME. So now we have TIME. So what is it? That the language, this is just one very small example, but there are so many things. The Van, W-H-E-N, when that we say, it was W-H-A-N. If you remember the first line, Van the April, the poem starts like that. So these spellings also keep on changing. So words keep on changing. Expressions keep on changing. So language cannot be rigid. So how can a language teacher be rigid? We'll also supposed to grow and just do on and on, just experimentation with a language and keep on growing with the growing language. Now, introducing linguistic ontogeny, you must know that the process of development of speech habits in a single person from birth to death is linguistic ontogeny, the study of which is one aspect of diachronic linguistics. This definition has been given by Charles F. Hockett, who was a professor of linguistics and anthropology in Cornell University. Just try to understand this definition. What is this definition? The process of development of speech habits. Linguistic ontogeny. Linguistic related video language. Ontogeny from birth till maturation, the development. So, development of what? Not the body organs, but the speech habits. Speech habits in a single person from birth till death of that particular person. It is linguistic ontogeny. So there are three long-standing questions about the role of the child in language evaluation and diachronic linguistics. That is, the processes whereby language arose in our species and the ceaseless changes of human language once it is present in the species. The four basic questions come at the surface level that are must to answer. Number 1, does linguistic ontogeny recapitulate phylogeny? Number 2, does linguistic diachrony recapitulate ontogeny? Third, whether historical changes in language mirror ontogenetic changes? Fourth, do children create grammatical forms? Let us answer these questions one by one. Question number 1, does linguistic ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny? Let me ask, whether linguistic ontogeny can be conceived of as a recapitulation of linguistic phylogeny? The answer I get is that the linguistic ontogeny does not recapitulate phylogeny, because the form and content of under 2 child language is shaped by the form and content of an already existing exposer language. Further, if we compare the rates of development of various cognitive capacities in contemporary primate species, Heterochronic relations between various developing capacities indicate that any particular set of capacities, such as those underlying language, pattern in distinctly different ways across species. Therefore, process of human language development are not likely to mirror the phylogenetic origins of such processes. Second question, does linguistic diachrony recapitulate ontogeny? The question means, do patterns of historical change of existing languages mirror the ways in which human children acquire existing language? The position has been advanced repeatedly over the last several centuries due to striking parallels between patterns of language development in individual children and repeated diachronic changes in languages. One is tempted to propose that similar cognitive processes underlie both sorts of development. The fact that we cannot examine in the history of languages are available to us in the child. There are certain easy routes. They are frequently the same ones that languages have followed in the course of their evolution, and that the child in turn takes up in learning his language. Now, third question, whether historical changes in language mirror ontogenetic changes. In contemporary linguistics, the child learner is seen as the source of various sorts of language change, both in generative accounts and functional approaches. Why would one propose such an explanation for historical language change? It is based on a simple set of propositions. Children are imperfect learners. Their error tend towards regularization. Languages are imperfect systems. They tend towards regularization too. And child learners are responsible for changing the language. Do children create grammatical forms? Before that, let us once again talk about whether historical changes in language mirror ontogenetic changes or not. The past tense case study suggests that children in the early stages of acquisition are not the ones who push the language forward. Other work in developmental psycholinguistics also suggests that children are not the ones to create new grammatical forms. In brief, preschoolers are at work sorting out the regularities and irregularities of subsystems of the language on the basis of limited information. Other children, having established a working knowledge of the language and using a larger database, are able to apply patterns at the level of the language as a system. That is, they have a sufficient grasp of the overall structure of the language to allow them to adjust particular parts of the system. Again, the immature learner does not serve as an appropriate model of the processes of change. We can enjoy the language uttered by a child, but we cannot take it as a role model. In the same way, we continue with this thing, and there are certain more things to discuss regarding, do children create grammatical forms? There are three sorts of situations in which we can ask whether children can create or not. First is the emergence of Creole languages. Second, the invention of home signs by deaf children with hearing parents. Third, emergence of a new sign language. With regard to each situation, it has been proposed that children have the capacity to innovate structure, suggesting that this is an innate capacity that arose in the evolution of our species. So, do children create grammatical forms is still a question to be debated. To some extent, it is said that they do, but within limits. At least in the gestural modality, deaf children with no sign language input can create a gestural language that has systematic patterns of reference and sign order. Children who acquire a partially structured language, either a Pidgin language or an incipient sign language based on home sign, are skilled at making the language into a more efficient and regular system. In a nutshell, the answer to all these questions is mainly negative because the particular language being acquired shapes ontogeny. That is, there is no universal form of early child language that reflects a biologically specified proto-language. In historical change of existing languages, it appears that lasting innovations do not come from preschoolers but from older speakers. That is, language changes more in use than it does in the process of being learned. Languages are socio-cultural as well as individual products. Therefore, we can't expect to discover the phylogenetic origins of human language by studying the individual alone. Now, there are various approaches to linguistic ontogeny. We have mainly two to discuss over here, which are complementary and not contradictory. One approach to linguistic ontogeny is child-centered, concerned with what the acquisition of communicative habits does to the child. Another approach is system-centered, and that is concerned rather with the impact of the child on the communicative systems that he is acquiring. Still, if we compare the two approaches, we find that the system-centered approach is more widely accepted and prevalent. The Homo sapiens child is different as the child is exposed to some already evolved human language and is equipped with a brain that evolved to make use of such a language. Initially, babies have very limited ability to change their position in order to interact with the world around them. By about the 8th month, there develops the stage of secondary intersubjectivity, when by following the other's direction of gaze or point, mother and infant are able to achieve joint attention to some person or object that is of mutual interest. At this stage, the mother frequently signals her awareness of the infant's interest by bringing the object within the infant's reach and by naming the object and making some comment about it. By doing so, the mother treats the object of attention as having meaning as well as material form. For example, an infant shows an interest in the spoon that is used to feed her, and her mother hands her the tool and at the same time names it spoon. Then in the due course, the infant will take over the use of the word spoon to call attention to or ask for the spoon. And this signing will coordinate the mother's and the infant's actions with respect to the spoon and the uses to which it may be put. This is about the object. What about grammar? How the grammar is acquired by the child. Once successful analogical coinage has taken place, the habit of building new utterances with raw materials extracted from old ones is reinforced by the success. The leap is often extremely sudden and is followed by an amazingly rapid proliferation of what the child says. Coinage which deviate too radically from what is provided for by the grammatical system of the adult language do not meet with understanding. The coinage and the specific analogies on which they are based are abandoned for lack of reinforcement. The correlation between the development of phonemic and of grammatical habits is not clear. It is known that some children make a holistic false start on pronunciation, learning to imitate a few adult utterances with remarkable phonetic accuracy, but then losing this accuracy temporarily as true phonemic habits again. The development of a child's phonemic system from one stage to the next thus takes the form of a splitting of some articulatory range into smaller contrasting sub-ranges. In a nutshell, the child's utterances are not in general a routine phoneme by phoneme transformation of the adult form. Rather, consonant clusters may be mapped into single consonants, unstressed syllables are often omitted, and a single consonant may be repeated in successive syllables like ma, 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 pa, 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 pa. These are the usual signs that we hear from a child repeatedly. Now let us also talk about semantic aspect of linguistic ontogeny. The emotional context of the child's earliest communicative participation, long before his earliest speech, establish a pattern of connotations that are germinal for the personality type of an individual. The broad outlines of the debate are as follows. I quote, individualists believe that the proper object of the scientific study of language is the language of an individual, his idiolect, or in Chomskyan terms, his mental grammar, knowledge of language. Individuals typically believe that semantic notions such as reference and meaning are dependent on such individualistic facts. This does not necessarily mean that social aspects of language are unimportant or that they do not admit of a scientific description, though some individualists have made this further claim. This was propounded by Chomsky in 1975. However, most individualists do believe that only individualistic aspect of language can be formalized and used to make predictions. The neural basis of language evaluation must remain speculative since clear phylogenetic data are unavailable. One approach is to compare different species in their ability to learn language, in particular, syntax or rule-based sequences. Second is to consult ontogenetic data on language development and brain maturation under the assumption that ontogeny to some extent reflects phylogeny. In this module, data from both approaches with a strong focus on rule-based and syntactic sequence learning will be discussed. Let us consider child as a linguistic adult. Is it true? Can we consider a child as a linguistic adult or not? By the age of 4 to 6, as the research has shown, the normal child is a linguistic adult. He controls, with marginal exceptions if any, the phonemic systems of his language. He does so by handling effortlessly the grammatical core and using the basic connective vocabulary of the language. Not only brain size, but also cultural remains such as tools, shelters, or evidence of feeding techniques can provide important clues to the evolution of language. On the basis of these considerations, language like tool use and brain size is postulated to have evolved slowly over several million years. With each cognitive and linguistic advance, new foraging and social interactive skills would have arisen. It is suggested that, as in ontogeny, language evaluation began in mother-child dyads with the communication of simple needs and desires by 1 to 2 word utterances. As grammatical skills increased, hominids became capable of discussing cooperative endeavors and absent rendezvous or other sites. Let us talk more about linguistic phylogeny. The histories of languages as wholes through successive decades and centuries is linguistic phylogeny, said by Charles F. Hockett. Increasingly, work is being done using the methods of phylogenetic systematics to uncover cultural and linguistic evolution. It was said in 19th century by E. H. Haeckel, who developed the idea that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. By this he meant that it was possible to gain insight into the evolution of a species by studying the development of individuals belonging to specific species and vice versa, that it was possible to gain knowledge about the ontogenic development of individuals that belong to a certain species by studying the evolutionary emergence of that species. Biological scholars around the world today reject his law as a fundamental law or principle in evolution, but discussion remains about whether his principle can be applied or not. Phylogenetic change. In principle, all historical linguistics is phylogenetic. Since phylogenetic encompasses the scientific investigation of the descent of organism in general, while prototypical phylogenetic analysis involves investigating the evolutionary descent of a class of biological species. Thus, to summarize, we can say that a popular approach points to the similarities between the ontogeny and phylogeny of language. The ontogeny and phylogeny argument has force only if the parallels between primate and child language are genuine. It is interesting to note how a child captures the language, how it develops, and how he continues to just carry on that language for communication in his particular society. So keep reading, keep learning. Thank you for visiting EPG Pathshala.